There are people walking around today, fully convinced they're doing everything right. They wake up, they try, they plan, they even consume content like this. But nothing changes. Not their income, not their discipline, not their reality. And the dangerous part, they don't even realize what's holding them back. Because the enemy isn't outside. It's the way they think. Not obvious thoughts, not loud ones, but quiet, repeated mental patterns that feel normal, comfortable, logical, even justified. But those patterns are poison. And the longer you keep them, the more they shape your identity. Until one day, you don't just have a toxic mindset. You become it. The Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Most people read that and move on. But look closer. If your thoughts are weak, your life becomes weak. If your thoughts are reactive, your life becomes chaotic. If your thoughts are toxic, your future becomes limited. No external enemy is required. You sabotage yourself. Quietly, consistently, daily. And here's what makes it worse. Toxic mindsets don't feel like weaknesses. They feel like protection. They feel like intelligence. They feel like caution. They feel like, this is just who I am. But they are cages, invisible ones. And today, you're going to identify 3 of them. Not surface level advice, not recycled motivation, but the exact patterns that keep people stuck for years, while they wonder why nothing is changing. The first one is the most dangerous. Because almost everyone has it. And almost no one admits it. It's the mindset of, I'll start when I'm ready. It sounds harmless, even responsible. After all, preparation matters, right? Planning matters. Timing matters. But this mindset is not about preparation. It's about avoidance. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself, I just need a little more time. I'll begin next week. I need to get things in order first. It feels productive, but nothing actually happens. Days pass, weeks pass, months pass, and you're still standing in the same place, waiting for a version of yourself that doesn't exist. Because readiness is a myth. There is no moment where fear disappears. No moment where doubt goes silent. No moment where you suddenly feel fully prepared. That moment never comes. And deep down, you know that. But the mind is clever. It uses readiness as a shield to protect you from discomfort, from risk, from failure, from judgment. So instead of moving forward, you stay in place and call it waiting for the right time. But the Stoics saw through this illusion. Seneca warned that while we waste time hesitating, life moves on without us. Not slowly, not patiently, but relentlessly. Every second you delay action, you are actively choosing stagnation. And here's the brutal truth. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to start. Because hesitation builds inertia, and inertia builds identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who plans, but never executes. Someone who thinks deeply, but never acts decisively. And that identity becomes your prison. So what's the alternative? It's not reckless action. It's imperfect action. Starting before you feel ready. Moving while uncertain. Acting despite fear. Because action creates clarity, not the other way around. You don't think your way into confidence. You act your way into it. And until you break this pattern, you will remain stuck in a loop of intention without transformation. And that is one of the most dangerous places a person can live. Because it gives the illusion of progress, while delivering none. But this is only the beginning. Because the second mindset is even more deceptive. It doesn't delay your life. It distorts it. And if you don't catch it early, it will make sure you never take full responsibility for anything. The second toxic mindset is quieter, less obvious, more socially accepted. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. It sounds like this: it's not really my fault. Not said out loud, but repeated internally, over and over again. When things don't work out, it's the economy, it's my background, it's the people around me, it's bad luck. And sometimes, those things are real. But this mindset doesn't just acknowledge obstacles. It hands over control to them. It turns circumstances into excuses. And slowly, it removes your power. Because the moment you believe that your life is controlled by external forces, you stop trying to control anything at all. You become reactive instead of deliberate. You wait instead of act. You complain instead of adapt. And the worst part, you feel justified doing it. The Stoics drew a hard line between what you can control and what you cannot. Epictetus made it clear, your thoughts, your actions, your responses, those are yours. Everything else, noise. But most people reverse this. They obsess over what they can't control, and neglect the only thing they actually can. Their own behavior. Look closely at your own patterns. When something fails in your life, where does your mind go first? Outward, or inward? Do you analyze what you could have done differently? Or do you immediately search for something to blame? Because that first reaction reveals everything. Blame feels good in the moment. It protects your ego. It keeps your self-image intact. But it comes at a cost. Growth. You cannot improve what you refuse to own. You cannot fix what you keep externalizing. And over time, this mindset becomes a habit. A reflex. Something automatic. You lose a chance, blame the system. You fail a goal, blame your situation. You fall behind, blame time, people, conditions. Until one day, you've built a life where nothing is ever your responsibility. And because of that, nothing ever truly changes. This is not about guilt. It's about control. Radical ownership is not punishment. It's power. Because the moment you say, "This is on me," you also say, "I can change it," even if the situation wasn't entirely your fault. Your response always is. And that's where your leverage is. That's where your growth lives. High performers don't have better circumstances. They have stricter accountability. They look at the same situation. And instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" they ask, "What can I do with this?" That single shift separates victims from builders. Because victims wait for things to change. Builders change things. And once you internalize this, you stop negotiating with reality. You stop waiting for fairness. You stop expecting perfect conditions. You act anyway, adjust anyway, improve anyway. That's how momentum is built. Not through comfort, but through ownership. But there's a third mindset. And this one is the most subtle of all. It doesn't sound negative. It doesn't feel toxic. In fact, it often feels like ambition, like desire, like motivation. But underneath it is a constant dissatisfaction that quietly destroys your peace and sabotages your progress. If you don't recognize it, you'll spend your entire life chasing something without ever feeling like you've arrived. The third toxic mindset doesn't look like a weakness. It looks like drive. It sounds like ambition. It feels like hunger. But underneath it is a quiet instability that keeps you restless, distracted, and never satisfied. It's the mindset of, "I'll be happy when I make more money, when I get the recognition, when I reach that level, when things finally go my way." On the surface, this seems reasonable. Goals are important. Progress matters. But this mindset does something dangerous. It postpones your life. It conditions your mind to believe that your current state is not enough. And that fulfillment exists somewhere in the future. Always in the future. Never now. So no matter what you achieve, it never feels complete. You hit a milestone, your mind moves the target. You reach a goal, your satisfaction fades quickly. You improve your life, but it still feels lacking. Because you've trained yourself to attach happiness to outcomes instead of identity. And outcomes are unstable. They change. They fluctuate. They disappear. Which means your emotional state becomes unstable too. You are only okay when things go your way. And when they don't, you collapse internally. The Stoics rejected this completely. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man's life is what his thoughts make of it. Not his achievements, not his possessions, not his status, his thoughts. That means fulfillment is not something you arrive at. It's something you practice, daily, internally, independent of external results. But most people never develop this. They live in a constant loop of chasing. And chasing creates a subtle form of suffering. Because it keeps you in a permanent state of, not enough. Not successful enough. Not rich enough. Not respected enough. Not where you should be. That pressure builds over time. And instead of fueling you, it exhausts you. You begin to associate effort with frustration. Progress with anxiety. Growth with dissatisfaction. So even when you're moving forward, you don't feel good doing it. And eventually, you burn out. Not because you lacked discipline, but because your mindset made the journey unbearable. This is why so many people quit right before things start working. They don't lack ability. They lack internal stability. So what's the correction? It's not abandoning ambition. It's redefining it. You stop saying, "I'll be happy when I get there." And you start saying, "I will build a mindset that remains steady, regardless of where I am." You detach your emotional state from outcomes. And attach it to standards. Did you show up? Did you execute? Did you improve? If the answer is yes, you've already won for that day. This creates something powerful: consistency without emotional volatility. You are no longer dependent on results to feel okay. You operate from discipline, not desperation, from clarity, not craving. And paradoxically, this is what accelerates your progress. Because when you remove the emotional pressure, you perform better, you think clearer, you last longer. And longevity is what most people underestimate. They want intensity, but success comes from sustainability. From being able to show up, day after day, without needing constant validation. This is the mindset shift. From chasing fulfillment, to generating it internally. From needing results, to focusing on process. From, "I'll be happy when," to, "I am stable now, and I build forward." And once this locks in, you become dangerous. Because now, nothing external can easily shake you. No delay, no failure, no temporary setback. You adapt, you continue, you move. That's the difference. Now step back, look at the three patterns. Waiting for readiness, avoiding responsibility, chasing future happiness. They seem separate, but they all lead to the same place. Stagnation. One delays action, one removes ownership, one destroys satisfaction. Together, they trap you in a cycle where you're always thinking, but rarely transforming. And breaking this cycle doesn't require more information. It requires confrontation. You have to see these patterns clearly, and reject them deliberately, not once, but repeatedly, because they will try to come back. They will disguise themselves again, as logic, as comfort, as caution. But now you know what they are, and that changes everything, because awareness creates distance, and distance creates control. So here's the final question. Which one of these mindsets has been running your life? Not theoretically, practically, daily. Because identifying it is the first real step. But eliminating it, that's where transformation begins. And if you're serious about that transformation, then don't stop here. Continue to the next lesson. Don't break the chain. There's a pattern most people never notice. Not because it's hidden, but because they're living inside it. Watch closely. A man wakes up with intention. He tells himself today will be different. He's tired of where he is. Tired of the lack of progress. Tired of feeling stuck. So he decides to act. But almost immediately, the first mindset appears. I'll start when I'm ready. He looks at the task in front of him. It feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar. So he delays. I need to plan this better. I'll begin later today. Let me prepare properly first. Hours pass. Nothing meaningful gets done. The day slips. And now, something shifts internally. A quiet frustration. A subtle disappointment. But instead of confronting it, the second mindset takes over. It's not really my fault. He looks outward. Today was just off. I didn't have the right energy. There were too many distractions. And just like that, responsibility is redirected. Not aggressively, not consciously, but effectively. Because now, there's no reason to change anything. The system is protected. The identity remains intact. But the cost, progress is lost. Then night comes. And this is where the third mindset completes the cycle. He tells himself, tomorrow will be better. I'll be happy when I get things right. And that thought feels comforting, hopeful, like a reset. But it's not a reset. It's a loop. Because tomorrow arrives, and the same sequence repeats. Delay, excuse, emotional postponement, over and over again. Days become weeks, weeks become months, and eventually, this pattern solidifies into identity. Not someone who failed once, but someone who lives this way. Someone who waits, someone who deflects, someone who chases a future state that never arrives. And from the outside, it doesn't look dramatic. There's no collapse, no visible disaster, just slow, quiet stagnation. Which is more dangerous? Because dramatic failure forces change. But silent stagnation feels normal. And what feels normal rarely gets questioned. This is how people lose years of their life. Not through one big mistake, but through small repeated patterns. Unchallenged, uncorrected, unnoticed. Until one day, they look up and realize nothing has changed. Same habits, same mindset, same results, just older. This is the cost of these three mindsets combined. Not immediate destruction, but long-term erosion of potential, of confidence, of identity. And the worst part, it doesn't feel like you're doing anything wrong. That's the trap, because the system is smooth, comfortable, justifiable, but completely ineffective. Now contrast that with someone who breaks the pattern. Same starting point, same environment, same limitations, but different thinking. He wakes up and acts before he feels ready. Not perfectly, not confidently, but immediately. The discomfort is there, but he moves anyway. That alone breaks the first loop. Then something goes wrong. It doesn't work. He fails. But instead of looking outward, he looks inward. What did I do wrong? What can I adjust? What's within my control? No blame, no deflection, just correction. That breaks the second loop. Then at the end of the day, he doesn't measure his worth by outcomes. He measures it by execution. Did I show up? Did I push? Did I improve? If yes, he's stable, even if results are small. That breaks the third loop. Now something different happens. Momentum. Not explosive, not dramatic, but consistent. And consistency compounds. Day by day, week by week, until the gap between these two people becomes massive. Not because one had more talent, but because one had better mental patterns. That's the difference. And this is why mindset is not just philosophy. It's mechanics. It determines what you do, repeatedly. And what you do repeatedly builds your life. So the question is no longer, do these mindsets exist? You've already seen them. The real question is, are you going to interrupt the pattern, or continue it? Because once you see the loop clearly, continuing it becomes a choice. And that choice will define everything that follows. There's a moment most people never talk about. Not the loud moments, not the visible ones, but the quiet internal battles, where decisions are actually made. It doesn't look dramatic. No audience, no pressure from the outside. Just you, and your mind. And in that moment, two voices start to form. The first one is familiar, comfortable, convincing. It says, not today, you're not ready yet, this isn't the right time. You can do this later. It sounds reasonable, even protective. But then, there's a second voice. Quieter, less emotional. It doesn't argue loudly. It doesn't try to comfort you. It just states facts. If not now, when? If you delay again, what changes? How many times have you said this before? This is the conflict, not between you and the world, but between two versions of you. One that seeks comfort, and one that seeks growth. Most people think discipline is about motivation. It's not. It's about which voice you obey in that moment. Because that moment repeats, every single day, when the alarm goes off, when the work gets hard, when distractions appear, when failure hits, each time, the same internal negotiation begins. And if you're not aware of it, you default to the easier voice. The one that delays, the one that excuses, the one that promises a better, later. But later never arrives. And this is where most people lose. Not in big, obvious failures, but in small, repeated decisions. They lose the negotiation, over and over again, until it becomes automatic, until the comfortable voice becomes dominant, until discipline feels unnatural, and avoidance feels normal. But here's what changes everything. Awareness of the dialogue. When you can hear both voices clearly, you create a gap, a moment of choice, and in that gap, you can intervene. You can override the default. You can act against your immediate impulse. This is what the Stoics trained for. Epictetus emphasized that it's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. That judgment happens instantly, silently, internally, and if you don't question it, you obey it, without resistance. But when you begin to challenge it, everything shifts. The thought says, skip this. You respond, no, do it anyway. The thought says, this is too hard. You respond, That's the point. The thought says, you can't handle this. You respond, watch me. Now you're not just thinking. You're directing your thinking. And that's a different level of control. Because once you can interrupt your own patterns, you stop being controlled by them. This is where discipline is born. Not from motivation, not from inspiration, but from repeated internal victories. Small ones, quiet ones, but consistent. Each time you override the weaker voice, you strengthen the other one. The voice of action, the voice of responsibility, the voice of stability. At first, it's difficult, unnatural, even uncomfortable, but over time, it becomes your default. And when that happens, everything changes. You don't need to force yourself as much. You don't need constant motivation. You operate from identity, from who you've trained yourself to be. Someone who acts, someone who owns, someone who remains steady. And once that identity locks in, the external results follow, not immediately, but inevitably, because behavior drives outcomes, and behavior is driven by internal decisions. Moment by moment, day by day. So the battle isn't out there. It's here, in the silent conversations you have with yourself. And if you can win those consistently, there's very little in the external world that can stop you. At some point, awareness is no longer enough. You've seen the patterns. You've recognized the loop. You've even caught yourself in those internal conversations. But recognition without reconstruction changes nothing. Because if you remove a mindset and don't replace it, the old one returns, stronger, more convincing. So now, the task shifts from identifying what's broken to installing what works. This is where most people fail. They try to stop being toxic without defining what to become. And the mind doesn't operate in negatives. It needs direction, structure, standards. So instead of saying, I won't delay anymore, you build a rule. I act immediately when something matters. Not perfectly, not completely, but immediately, even if it's small, even if it's uncomfortable, because action is the antidote to hesitation. Then instead of saying, I won't make excuses, you install another rule. I take ownership of every outcome. Not because everything is your fault, but because ownership gives you leverage. It gives you something to work with, something to improve, something to control. Without it, you're powerless. Then the third shift. Instead of saying, I won't depend on results for happiness, you redefine your metric. I measure my day by execution, not outcomes. Did you show up? Did you follow through? Did you push past resistance? If yes, you stabilize internally, regardless of what happened externally. This is how you rebuild your mental framework. Not through vague motivation, but through clear operating principles. Rules that guide behavior, standards that shape identity. This is what separates people who understand from people who transform. Understanding is passive, rebuilding is active, and rebuilding requires repetition. Because your current mindset wasn't formed in a day. It was built through repeated thoughts, repeated decisions, repeated behaviors. So changing it requires the same process. Deliberate, consistent, uncomfortable at first, but effective over time. This is where most people quit. Not because it's impossible, but because it's not instant. They expect a shift in feeling before a shift in identity. But it works the other way around. You act differently first, then you become different. And that gap between action and identity is where discipline lives. The Stoics understood this deeply. Seneca emphasized that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Most of your resistance is not the task itself. It's the story you tell yourself about it. That's too hard. That's too much. That's not me. But once you act, you realize something important. It wasn't as impossible as you thought. It wasn't as overwhelming as your mind made it seem. And that realization weakens the old patterns. Each action becomes evidence. Evidence that you can move, that you can decide, that you can execute. And slowly, your identity shifts from someone who hesitates to someone who acts, from someone who blames to someone who builds, from someone who chases to someone who stabilizes. This is not a motivational shift. It's structural. You are changing how your mind operates, how it interprets situations, how it responds to discomfort, how it defines success. And once that structure changes, your results follow naturally. Because now, Your behavior is aligned, consistent, directed, intentional. This is the rebuild, and it's not glamorous. It's not loud. It's quiet work, daily, unseen, but powerful, because over time, it compounds into something most people never achieve. Control, not over the world, but over yourself, and that changes everything. There's a version of your life you don't want to see, not because it's unrealistic, but because it's too possible. It's the version where nothing changes, not dramatically worse, not catastrophically broken, just the same, year after year, same habits, same thinking, same excuses, refined, justified, repeated. You wake up with intention, but it fades by midday. You plan, but don't execute. You want more, but operate the same, and time doesn't stop to question you. It moves, quietly, indifferently, relentlessly. The Stoics had a clear awareness of this. Marcus Aurelius reflected often on how short life is. Not to create fear, but to eliminate illusion, because most people live as if there's always more time, more chances, more resets, more later. But later is the most dangerous word in your vocabulary. It delays action, it softens urgency, it creates a false sense of security. And while you rely on it, life moves forward without your permission. Look at people who are 10 years ahead of you. Not in age, but in results. Most of them didn't have a completely different starting point. They simply didn't wait. They didn't negotiate with their excuses as often. They didn't allow toxic patterns to repeat unchecked. And over time, that difference compounded. Now reverse it. Project yourself forward. If nothing changes in your thinking, where do you end up? Be precise, not vague. Do you become more disciplined, or less? More focused, or more distracted? More in control, or more reactive? Because patterns don't stay neutral. They either strengthen, or they decay. There is no pause. So every time you delay action, you reinforce hesitation. Every time you avoid responsibility, you reinforce weakness. Every time you tie your happiness to outcomes, you reinforce instability. And over years, that becomes your default state. Not something you chose consciously, but something you built through repetition. That's the cost. Not failure, but limitation. Living below your capacity, knowing you could have done more, but didn't. That awareness is heavier than failure, because failure at least implies effort. But stagnation, that's regret. And regret doesn't show up immediately. It builds quietly, until one day, you can't ignore it. So this is the moment to decide. Not emotionally, not temporarily, but structurally. Are you going to continue reinforcing these patterns? Or interrupt them? Because once you've seen them clearly, continuing them is no longer unconscious. It's a choice, and that choice has consequences. Not tomorrow, not instantly, but inevitably. You don't need more time. You don't need more information. You need a shift in standards. A refusal to tolerate the patterns you've identified. A commitment to act, even when it's inconvenient. Because inconvenience is temporary, but the life built from avoiding it is permanent. This is the line most people never cross. They understand, but they don't commit. They see the truth, but they don't apply it. And because of that, nothing changes. So if you're still here, this is where you separate. Not by what you know, but by what you do next. At this point, everything is clear. You've seen the patterns. You've understood the mechanics. You've watched how these mindsets quietly shape an entire life. So now, there's nothing left to explain. Only something to decide. Because information doesn't change people. Decision does. Right now, you're standing in a very specific position. Not at the beginning, but not yet transformed. Aware, but untested. And this is where most people fall back. Not because they disagree, but because they delay applying. They tell themselves, I'll start tomorrow. I'll ease into it. I'll try to be more disciplined. And without realizing it, they fall back into the same first mindset. Delay. That's how strong these patterns are. They don't disappear just because you understand them. They wait. They reappear in subtle ways. They sound reasonable again. And if you're not careful, you slide back into the same cycle. So instead of easing into anything, you do something different. You interrupt the pattern immediately. Not later. Not tonight. Now. You take one action you've been delaying. And you move on it. Small or large doesn't matter. What matters is breaking the loop. Because the first action is not about progress. It's about identity. It sends a signal. I don't wait anymore. Then you take ownership of something you've been avoiding. No excuses. No external blame. Just a clear acknowledgement. This is on me, and I fix it. That's not weakness. That's control. Then you stabilize your mindset. You stop measuring your worth based on outcomes. And start measuring it based on execution. Did you act? Did you follow through? Did you push when it was uncomfortable? If yes, you're already operating differently. And that difference is where everything begins. This is not a one-time shift. It's a daily standard. Something you reinforce again and again. Until it becomes automatic. Until the version of you that used to hesitate feels unfamiliar. Until discipline becomes normal. And excuses feel out of place. That's when the real change happens. Quietly, internally, but permanently. And from there, everything else follows. Your focus sharpens. Your actions align. Your results improve. Not because you chased them, but because you built the structure that produces them. So there's nothing left to add. No extra motivation needed. No final push required. Just one instruction. Act differently. Immediately. Break the delay. Reject the excuse. Detach from outcome. And repeat it. Daily. Because the life you're trying to build is not created in one moment. It's created in patterns. And you've just seen exactly which ones to eliminate. And which ones to install. Now use it. And don't stop here. Continue to the next lesson. Don't break the chain.